On the outside, everything about Sarah and Mark Williams looked picture perfect. Their two-story home sat proudly in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Denver, Colorado, where every lawn was neatly trimmed and every driveway showcased polished SUVs. Sarah, 32 years old with her long blonde hair and flawless smile, fit the role of the suburban wife effortlessly. She was a mother who packed lunches with handwritten notes tucked inside, the neighbor who waved cheerfully while watering her roses, and the hostess who made sure everyone left her parties with full stomach and a warm memory. Mark, on the other hand, was the kind of man people trusted immediately. At 35, he worked as an insurance agent, building a reputation for reliability and hard work. He rarely missed his daughter's soccer games, though he often came in his office clothes, tie loosened and phone buzzing in his hand. He loved Sarah deeply, or at least he thought he did. Their 10-year marriage had slipped into a rhythm of routine. Shared coffee in the mornings, rushed kisses before work, family dinners with polite conversation, and nights spent scrolling to their phones in bed. But under the polished surface, Sarah felt something hollow growing inside her. She would look across the table at Mark, who was scrolling through client emails while eating his reheated leftovers. And she would feel invisible. The man who once brought her flowers just because now brought paperwork home. Stacks of files spreading across their dining table, like weeds overtaking a garden. Loneliness crept into Sarah's heart in quiet ways. She noticed it most when she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair at night. She looked at herself and wondered if anyone still saw her as desirable. Was she only a wife, only a mother, only a neighbor? She remembered how Mark used to whisper compliments into her ear when they were newlyweds, how he once drove across town just to surprise her with takeout from her favorite restaurant. Now, their kisses were pecks, their hugs brief, their intimacy reduced to something scheduled and expected. The cracks were invisible to outsiders. Their neighbors saw Sarah and Mark as a golden couple, the embodiment of suburban happiness. But Sarah knew better. She felt it late at night, lying awake while Mark snored beside her. She felt it in the mornings, when she forced a smile and brewed coffee for a man who barely looked up from his phone. And it was on one of those the jogger appeared again the next morning. Sarah had almost convinced herself that the first encounter was a coincidence, nothing more than a fleeting glance. But when she walked into the kitchen with her coffee and saw him passing by at the exact same time, her heart skipped. This time, instead of just smiling, he raised his hand in a casual wave. Sarah hesitated, then lifted her fingers in return. A small gesture that felt strangely significant. She wasn't used to men noticing her anymore, not like this. When Mark looked at her, it was with the familiarity of a man who had shared 10 years of routine. But when this stranger's eyes met hers, there was curiosity, interest, even heat. She began to notice details she hadn't before. The way his t-shirt clung to his chest and shoulders, the rhythm of his strides, the confident tilt of his chin. He looked younger than Mark, maybe by a few years, but not boyish. There was a maturity in his face, a kind of self-assurance that unsettled her. That afternoon, as she folded laundry in the living room, Sarah caught herself staring out the window, waiting. She didn't see him. A strange disappointment pressed down on her chest, and she shook her head, laughing quietly at herself. "What are you doing?" she thought. "You're married. You have a daughter. You shouldn't even care." But the next day, when he slowed his jog near her driveway, pulling out one earbud to say, "Good morning," Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Morning," she managed, her voice softer than she intended. His smile widened. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She nodded quickly, gripping her coffee mug tighter. "It is." He didn't linger long, just enough to make her pulse race before he jogged on. That night, at dinner, Mark barely spoke. He shoveled food onto his fork while answering a text from his boss. Their daughter, Emily, chattered about her school project. But Sarah's mind drifted back to the jogger. She could still see his smile, hear his voice. Lying in bed later, Mark asleep beside her, Sarah replayed the brief exchange over and over. It was nothing, just small talk with a stranger. But to her, it felt like the first spark in a long time. The following week, their exchanges grew. A wave became a smile. A smile became a "how's your morning?" A quick chat by the mailbox lasted a few minutes longer than it should. Sarah learned his name was Jason, that he'd recently moved into a townhouse a few streets over, that he worked remotely in tech. He laughed easily, looked at her as though she were the most interesting person in the world, and listened in a way Mark hadn't in years. It was still innocent, or so Sarah told herself. But every morning, she found herself putting on lip gloss before pouring coffee, brushing her hair before stepping outside. She had started caring about how she looked again, and that alone made her heart flutter with guilt. The jogger wasn't just a man passing by anymore. He was becoming a dangerous temptation. Mornings, while she stood barefoot in the kitchen, sipping coffee and staring out at the street, that she first saw him, a stranger jogging past their house, his dark hair damp with sweat, his jawline sharp, his eyes locking with hers for just a second longer than casual. He smiled, and in that moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Noticed. Sarah tried to convince herself that nothing had changed, that her life was still the same rhythm of chores, errands, and family dinners. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. Jason's presence had begun to haunt her thoughts like a song she couldn't stop humming. She noticed herself becoming distracted. While driving Emily to school, she'd find her eyes drifting toward the sidewalks, hoping to spot him. When she scrolled through social media in the evenings, she wondered what his accounts might look like, whether he posted about running or about women. Mark, of course, didn't notice. His days were swallowed by work. He often came home late, tie loosened, exhaustion clinging to his face. Sometimes he kissed Sarah on the cheek. Other times, he just collapsed on the couch, scrolling through emails until bedtime. One Thursday evening, Sarah prepared a roast for dinner, a recipe she hadn't tried in years. She set the table carefully, even lit a candle, hoping to recreate some of the warmth they once shared. When Mark walked through the door, she greeted him with a hopeful smile. "You're home earlier than usual," she said. "Yeah," he muttered, dropping his briefcase. Boss canceled the late meeting. He glanced at the table. "What's all this?" "Just dinner," Sarah replied, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. They sat together, Emily chatting happily between them. Sarah watched Mark eat, waiting for a comment, some sign that he noticed effort. But all he said was, "Pass the salt." Her heart sank. The candle flickered between them, unacknowledged. Later that night, when she stepped out to take the trash to the curb, she froze. Jason was there, walking his dog under the street lamp glow. "Hey, stranger," he said, flashing that familiar grin. Sarah smiled back despite herself. "Out late, huh?" "Couldn't sleep," he shrugged. His eyes lingered on her a moment too long. "You look nice tonight." Heat rose in her cheeks. No one had told her that in months, maybe years. "Thanks. Just dinner at home." Jason nodded but didn't look away. For a few seconds, the air between them felt electric, heavy with unspoken possibility. Sarah's pulse quickened, and she found herself biting her lip. "I should get back inside," she whispered, her voice betraying her. Jason gave a small nod, but before she turned away, he said quietly, "Maybe next time we can grab coffee. Outside of this." The suggestion hung in the night air, dangerous and intoxicating. Sarah swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she hurried back into the house, leaning against the closed door as if to hold herself together. Upstairs, Mark was already asleep, but Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Jason's words echoing in her mind. "Maybe next time we can grab coffee." It was just coffee, just a simple meeting. Yet deep down, Sarah knew if she said yes, everything could change. Sarah told herself she wouldn't do it. She repeated it like a mantra as she brushed her hair, as she applied a subtle layer of mascara, as she carefully chose a blouse that was casual but flattering. "It's just coffee," she reasoned. "Just two neighbors being friendly. Nothing more." But the truth was, she knew better. Friends didn't make her heart race. Neighbors didn't make her palms sweat. When she thought about sitting across from them, Jason suggested a small cafe downtown, far enough from their neighborhood that no one would recognize them. The choice alone made Sarah's stomach twist with guilt. If this was truly innocent, why did it need to be secret? When she arrived, Jason was already there, seated by the window with 2 mugs on the table. He looked different outside his running clothes, clean-shaven, dressed in a simple button-down shirt that hinted at his broad shoulders. "You came," he said, standing to greet her with a smile that made her knees weak. "Yeah," Sarah replied softly, sliding into the seat. "I guess I did." The first few minutes were safe. They talked about the city, about Emily's school, about Jason's work in tech. But soon, the conversation drifted into dangerous waters. Jason leaned in, his voice lower, his eyes locked on hers. "So," he said, "does your husband know you're here?" The question hit like a dart. Sarah hesitated, fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "No," she admitted. Jason smirked slightly, not smug, but knowing. "Didn't think so." Sarah's heart pounded. She wanted to stand, to leave, to remind herself of the vows she had made. But instead, she stayed. Because for the first time in years, someone was asking about her. Not about bills or groceries or their daughter's schedule, but about her thoughts, her feelings, her life. An hour slipped by like minutes. When Sarah finally glanced at her phone, she realized she needed to pick up Emily from school. She pushed her chair back reluctantly. "I should go," she murmured. Jason nodded, standing as well. "Of course." But before she could leave, he reached out, lightly brushing his fingers against her hand. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her body. Sarah froze, staring at their hands. It was nothing more than skin on skin, yet it felt like crossing a line she could never uncross. "You don't have to explain anything," Jason said gently. "I just like being around you." Her breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to tell him this was a mistake. But instead, she whispered, "I like being around you too." The words escaped before she could stop them. That night at home, Sarah sat across from Mark at dinner, barely tasting her food. He was glued to his phone, nodding absent-mindedly at Emily's chatter. Sarah watched him, and for the first time, she realized something terrifying. She no longer felt guilty. Not fully. Instead, she felt alive. And that was even more dangerous than guilt. The next morning, Sarah woke with a strange mix of nerves and excitement. The memory of Jason's touch still lingered on her skin, as though it had branded her. She lay in bed listening to Mark's even breathing beside her, wondering how 2 men could make her feel such different things. One safe, familiar, and predictable, the other thrilling, dangerous, and alive. When Mark left for work, kissing her on the cheek without really looking at her, Sarah stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window. She expected Jason to jog past like usual, but he didn't. The absence made her restless, pacing the house with a nervous energy she couldn't explain. By noon, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Jason, hope you don't mind. I asked around for your number." I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. Her heart thudded. She knew she should delete it, ignore it, pretend she never saw it. Instead, her fingers typed back before her brain could stop them. "Sarah, I don't mind. I was thinking about it too." And just like that, the first real boundary shattered. Over the next week, their messages became constant. At first, lighthearted jokes and casual updates. Then longer, deeper confessions. Jason told her about his failed relationship back in Chicago, how he'd moved to Colorado for a fresh start. Sarah admitted how lonely she felt in her marriage, words she had never spoken aloud before. One afternoon, when Mark called to say he'd be late at work, Sarah found herself smiling, not disappointed but relieved. She used the extra hours to meet Jason again, this time at a quiet bookstore cafe. They sat in a secluded corner, laughing in whispers, their knees brushing beneath the table. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Jason asked, his eyes searching hers. Sarah swallowed hard. "Every day." He reached across the table,
Take it.
his hand covering hers. This time, she didn't pull away. The lies began small. Sarah told Mark she was meeting a friend for coffee, that she was running errands, that she was taking Emily to an after-school activity. Each excuse rolled off her tongue more easily than the last. Mark never questioned her. He was too distracted, too consumed by work to notice. One night, while folding laundry, Sarah caught herself humming. She realized she hadn't felt this light in years. The guilt was there, lingering in the corners of her mind, but it was weaker now, muffled by the thrill of secrecy. And then one evening, as Jason walked to their car after another hidden meeting, he leaned in. Sarah froze for a heartbeat, every instinct screaming at her to stop. But when his lips brushed hers, soft at first, then hungry, she melted. The kiss was fire. It was danger. It was everything she had been starving for. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Sarah's voice trembled. "We shouldn't." Jason touched her cheek gently. "I know, but I don't regret it." Neither did she. And that was the most dangerous truth of all. Once the first kiss happened, there was no going back. Sarah told herself she would stop, that it had been a mistake, that she could put the fire out before it consumed everything. But when Jason texted her the next morning, "Can't stop thinking about last night," her resolve crumbled instantly. Their meetings became more frequent, more daring. At first, they stuck to coffee shops and bookstores, places where they could talk quietly in corners. But soon, that wasn't enough. The pull between them grew too strong, and their stolen hours too short. One afternoon, Sarah told Mark she was volunteering at Emily's school. Instead, she drove to Jason's townhouse. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel as she parked, every nerve in her body screaming with anticipation and guilt. Jason opened the door before she even knocked, pulling her inside with urgency that made her head spin. Their kiss was different this time. Hungry, desperate, filled with weeks of bottled-up desire. "Are you sure about this?" Jason whispered against her lips. Sarah didn't answer with words. She answered by pulling him closer. That day marked the beginning of her double life. At home, she played the role of the devoted wife and mother. She packed lunches, helped with homework, smiled at neighbors. But beneath the surface, her mind was always elsewhere, replaying Jason's touch, the way his hands explored her, the way he made her feel like a woman again, not just someone's wife or mother. Mark, blinded by routine, didn't see the signs. If anything, he thought things were improving. Sarah laughed more, hummed while cooking, even seemed more affectionate toward him at times. He didn't know that her glow came not from him, but from stolen afternoons in Jason's bed. Still, the lies multiplied. Sarah found herself covering her tracks carefully, clearing text messages, changing clothes before coming home, spraying perfume to hide the scent of Jason's cologne. Each deception made her heart race, not just with fear, but with thrill. Yet the guilt was never fully gone. Late at night, lying next to Mark, she sometimes stared at his sleeping face.
Come on, little fire.
And felt a pang of shame so sharp it nearly broke her. She remembered the man he used to be, the one who courted her with flowers, who whispered promises into her ear. But then she thought how distant he'd become, how invisible she felt, and the shame softened into justification. "I deserve to feel alive," she told herself. "I deserve this." But deep down, Sarah knew the truth. She was building her world on quicksand. One wrong step, and everything could collapse. And though she didn't realize it yet, the cracks were already beginning to show. It happened on a Tuesday evening, in the most ordinary way. Sarah was clearing the dinner table while Mark helped Emily with her math homework at the kitchen counter. The house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread, laughter and conversation filling the air. For once, everything felt almost normal. But then Mark's phone buzzed, and as he reached for it, Sarah noticed his eyes flick toward hers. It wasn't the glance itself, it was a hesitation. The way his brow furrowed just slightly as if something had been gnawing at him. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Yeah," he said quickly, too quickly. He slipped the phone back onto the counter, without answering the message. "Just work." Sarah nodded, but unease coiled in her stomach. For weeks, she had been perfecting her lies, smoothing every rough edge. But was it possible she had slipped? Had he noticed a change in her habits? The extra effort she put into her appearance? The faint smell of a cologne that wasn't his? Later that night, as Sarah folded laundry in the bedroom, Mark lingered in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, his hands shoved into his pockets. "You've been different lately," he said finally. Sarah's heart pounded, but she forced a laugh. "Different how?" "I don't know." Mark replied slowly. Happier, maybe. More energy. It's good. I'm not complaining. I guess I wonder what changed. Her throat tightened. She turned back to the laundry, keeping her hands busy so he wouldn't see them shaking. Maybe I'm just trying to focus on the good stuff. Not stress so much. Mark studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Yeah, that makes sense. He walked away. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that his doubt lingered in the air. The next day, her nerves got worse. Every glance Mark gave her felt like scrutiny. Every question, where were you today? What time did you pick Emily up? Sounded sharper than before. He hadn't accused her of anything, but suspicion, once planted, had a way of spreading like ivy. Jason noticed it too. When Sarah told him about the conversation, his jaw tightened. You need to be careful, he warned, if he starts watching too closely. I know, she interrupted, her voice breaking. For the first time, fear began to outweigh thrill. The affair that once felt like an intoxicating escape now loomed like a shadow, threatening to unravel everything she held dear. And yet, when Jason kissed her goodbye that afternoon, Sarah didn't stop him. Even knowing the risks, she couldn't let go. But Mark wasn't blind. He was starting to see the cracks in the life they had built. And soon, he would be forced to face the truth. Mark never set out to spy on his wife. At least, that's what he told himself later. But suspicion has a way of burrowing deep, and once it takes root, it refuses to let go. It began with small things. Noticing how often Sarah's phone was face down on the counter, how she sometimes disappeared for an extra hour after running errands, how her smile seemed brighter when she thought no one was watching. For years, Mark had ignored the details of their marriage, too consumed by work. Now, every detail screamed at him. One Thursday afternoon, his schedule unexpectedly cleared. Instead of calling Sarah, he drove home early, imagining the surprised smile she might give him when he walked through the door. But when he pulled into the driveway, the house was empty. Her car was gone. He waited 10 minutes, 30, an hour. Finally, headlights swept across the window. As Sarah's car pulled in, she walked inside, her hair slightly tousled, her blouse buttoned wrong at the top. She froze when she saw him, sitting at the kitchen table. You're home early, she said, her voice tight. Mark studied her face. Where were you? Target, she replied too quickly. Emily needed supplies for her project. He didn't argue. He just nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. And in that silence, Sarah knew he didn't believe her. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. While Sarah lay stiff beside him, pretending to breathe evenly, he slipped out of bed and checked her phone. She had deleted everything, messages, call logs, even photos. But one number caught his eye in the recently deleted list. Unfamiliar, unmarked, but repeated again and again. The next day, while Sarah thought he was at work, Mark dialed the number. Hello. Jason's voice came through the line, casual, unguarded. Mark's blood ran cold. When Sarah returned home that evening, she found Mark waiting in the living room. His face was pale, his jaw tight, his phone clenched in his hand. Who is Jason? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. The world seemed to collapse around her. Sarah's knees buckled, her breath caught in her throat. She tried to speak, but the words tangled into silence. Don't lie to me, Mark said, his voice shaking now. I called him. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She opened her mouth, but no excuse would come. The truth hung between them, heavier than any silence they had ever endured. Mark stared at her for a long time, his face breaking apart piece by piece. Finally, he whispered, I gave you everything I could, and it wasn't enough, was it? Sarah sobbed, reaching for him, but he stepped back. That night, Mark slept on the couch. Sarah lay alone in their bed, the weight of her choices pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the lawns trimmed, the houses glowing with warm lights. To the world, the Williams family still looked perfect, but inside, the facade had shattered, and Sarah knew there was no way to put it back together again.